Mistletoe Fantasies. Pleasure Your Fantasies Series, Book 1. Written by Stacy Eaton. Narrated by Nikola Muchkayev. Chapter 1. Reba. I released a hefty sigh as I dropped my stage persona and passed through the garnet velvet curtain for the final time that night. I was always thankful when my dancing shift ended. It wasn't that I hated to dance. I did enjoy it. Kinda. Okay, sometimes. The money was good. Like, seriously damned good. That's what had enticed me to do it in the first place. I sure as hell wasn't a fan of strutting my stuff on the runway for the exclusive clientele. Of course, if there was any place where I had to be a dancer, I was glad that it was Pleasure Your Fantasies, and that Quinn Monroe was my boss. I leaned against the wall with one shoulder and unhooked my 5-inch platform heels as I pondered my sexy-as-sin elusive boss. Mr. Quinn Monroe ran a tight ship. He demanded respect, not only from his employees and his clients, but he expected his clients to have the utmost respect for his employees, especially for his dancers. Mr. Monroe also required his employees to be professional and take care of themselves, both mentally and physically. He didn't allow employees with emotional issues or bad habits to remain, unless they received help or kicked the habits. He'd give them a chance because he was a fair man, but if they couldn't deal with therapy or the process of getting clean, or, God forbid, remaining that way, then he kicked their asses to the curb. He had more important things to do, and I didn't blame him. All the employees knew the score when hired. They signed contracts that gave explicit instructions on what would happen should they be found to have emotional or substance abuse issues. They not only signed one when they were hired, but they signed it again once they were found to have a problem. In my opinion, Mr. Monroe was being extremely generous. In June, Ivy had fallen off the wagon. If it hadn't been for Sophia Thayer, an ICU nurse from Celebration Township who had been moonlighting as a dancer, Ivy would have died from a heroin overdose. Sophia had saved her life, and while Mr. Monroe had wanted to fire Ivy that night, he hadn't. He had not only taken care of her hospital bills, but paid for her rehab too. 2 weeks after she returned from rehab, he did a random drug test on her, and she failed. She was escorted off the property and banned from ever returning. No one had heard from or seen her since, at least that I was aware of. A few other dancers had come and gone, and so had other employees from other aspects of the business. One of the bouncers, Al, was let go last month, 2 kitchen staff before that, and one of the trainers was fired when Mr. Monroe found out he was not only using drugs, but dealing them to the clients. There wasn't even a second chance given to that guy. I yawned as I made my way to the dressing room. Mr. Monroe had a very comprehensive staff that, at my last count, included over 50 people. It might have grown, though, I wasn't sure. He kept his business affairs below a whisper. As far as I knew, only Ty had the boss's ear and knew the ins and outs of the business. The two of them were obviously thick as thieves, and Ty acted as Mr. Monroe's bodyguard when needed. Not that Mr. Monroe needed a bodyguard. I'd witnessed him take an unruly client down when he'd gotten out of control and no one else was around. Mr. Monroe hadn't hesitated to put the guy against the wall, and when the others had arrived, he'd straightened his coat, adjusted his tie and his cuffs, and then smiled, winked, and walked away as if nothing had happened. I had a feeling that Mr. Monroe had several other business dealings going on, which would explain why he was so well known in this area. When he opened this club 4 years ago, many people didn't think he could make it work, not when the membership was $6,000 a year. But Mr. Monroe made sure that his club had more than just dancers to entertain members at night. His building housed meeting rooms, places to hold conferences, a gym, a barber, saunas, a pool, several hot tubs, along with massage services, a game room that included pool and poker tables, and then the smoking room. Plus, he was currently having a large section of the basement renovated to install a wine cellar for special events. Mr. Monroe had built a booming business, and I'd heard that he was in the process of working on a similar club for women. I wondered how many of the men who frequented this club would allow their wives or girlfriends to join the sister club.